Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Dr. Christopher Willard. And he's here to share with us his new book, How We Grow Through What We Go Through: Self-Compassion Practices for Post-Traumatic Growth. So Dr. Willard is a clinical psychologist at Harvard Medical School and an author of over 18 publications for children and adults. An internationally sought-after speaker and mindfulness educator, his books include Growing Up Mindful, Raising Resilience, The Breath Book, and many more. So welcome to the show, Dr. Christopher Willard.
Thank you so much. It's fantastic to be here. I'm so excited to be sharing about my book and all this.
Well, my goodness, as soon as I saw this, I knew we needed to talk. And I found it so intriguing. What inspired you to even write this book?
Yeah, well, I'm a clinical psychologist, and so I work with a lot of people and I work with a lot of groups. And the pandemic began, as we can't forget, unfortunately. And suddenly my work shifted from people asking me, "Will you do some consultations around this or that, or mental health, or different kinds of topics?" To will you talk about trauma? And we talk about the impact of trauma on us as individuals, on us as a society, on families, on so many other people. And I started looking into trauma, and I had this amazing discovery as I started to sift through some of the research, which is that actually most of us in our lives do actually experience something in the way of trauma. But most of us experience what's called post-traumatic growth more actually than experience post-traumatic stress, which unfortunately gets all the press. And actually, what's interesting is that both can really happen at the same time. We can experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress, and post-traumatic growth, or some people call that PTG. And so I wanted to start exploring more about this, and that then led to the book, which is, again, like the title says, how do we grow through what we go through? And we go through a lot, and we've been through a lot, Marianne, especially in these past few years. And so many people we love have been through so much over the course of their lives.
Isn't that the truth? I look at it, I'm just like, wow, everyone's gone through so much. But when we talk about post-traumatic growth, can you break that down? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to be clear. I think one thing I learned about or heard a lot about during the pandemic was this idea of toxic positivity. And I really want to stay away from that, oh, every cloud is a silver lining, and there's something you can learn from every experience, and that, all that kind of, not so helpful toxic positivity, self-help speak. And what post-traumatic growth means is that growth and change for the better are possible. And in fact, they're probable. Right? Under certain conditions, we can go through hard times. And what we find is that we come out and come through it with maybe more wisdom, more perspective, stronger relationships to others, stronger relationships with ourselves, right? All of these kinds of transformations. For some people, it's also a stronger spiritual life, a stronger community life, a sense of purpose, a sense maybe of personal purpose, or maybe even activism in some way for themselves, that really can begin to create a sense of meaning that creates just more transformation, more healing in the world, for individuals and for really groups of people, communities, societies as well. So it's about how do we come out these things stronger, rather than in worse shape, or with feeling like our life is just perpetually falling apart even more.
I know there's a lot of people talking about trauma right now, and I'd love for you to define that for us so we're kind of all on the same page.
Absolutely. So trauma is like when we go through an event that's life-threatening or feels life-threatening for ourselves, and now actually it's applied to when we see someone else go through it, a life-threatening event, or something that'll cause irreparable harm or bodily harm or something like that. So it can be sickness, it can be an assault, it can be a natural disaster, a terrorist attack, something like that, and it can be relational too. It can be relationships. Can be traumatic. And what it means is that our nervous systems and our bodies, that they get rewired. So they start then looking for, assuming that there's that kind of danger always happening. And what happens if we walk around like there's always a danger about to happen around every corner, is we go into, what I might call the four F's, right? We have the fight response, right? Which is some of us, or we see in some people that we love who've been through trauma, right? More aggressive, trying to fight off any threat. right? Not so helpful, right, with our bosses in the workplace necessarily, or in certain situations. Or we go into the flight response where we avoid things, which makes sense, right? This seems scary. I want to avoid it. Of course we would do that. But over time, actually, that only creates more anxiety. We also have like the freeze response, which some of us might kind of be familiar with, just sort of freezing up, right, in the face of something challenging. And we have maybe what we call the faint response, or give up, or just kind of, we almost might say forget it, or maybe another F word besides forget it, just sort of like giving up, not really sure how to engage in life. That's when it becomes depression, basically, over time as a response to trauma. And then other people do other avoidance behaviors that we can think about, addictions and compulsions and things like that, that kind of blunt the impact of the really unpleasant feelings that can go along with a traumatic experience, in an attempt to regulate our nervous system in a different way. So that's why people turn to those substances or behaviors. So we have these different ways that we respond to threats or perceived threats, and then it really impacts our relationships. It impacts our work life. It impacts our ability to function when we're either fighting things we don't need to fight, or we're fleeing from things we don't need to flee from, or we're just feel like we're kind of like giving up and unable to engage, or we're blunting how we feel with substances and behaviors. None of those lead to a full life. But the good news is we have actually these other ways of responding to stress built into us that we might call the attend and befriend responses. Right? We learn how to show up for life in a new way, how to befriend our experiences, and our nervous systems calm down, and our brains start to focus, and our bodies feel better, and we feel healthier physically, we feel healthier emotionally and psychologically, we have healthier relationships, we make healthier choices consciously and unconsciously in our relationships and in other things we do in our lives. And these are then really transformational. But trauma comes when we feel out of control and things feel unpredictable, and we feel like there's going to be real harm done to us on a physical level, or on an emotional level of some kind, or to someone that we love or care about, or we see something that looks completely out of control. Yeah.
So, how do we make that pivot from the behaviors that are keeping us stuck and in that trauma, and kind of reliving that, to now we're able to move into a more positive aspect for ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the places where I've been a therapist for many years, a psychologist, working with people, and I've been to plenty of therapy in my own life too. And I think where a lot of us get stuck is this belief that we can think our way into a new way of feeling or think our way into a new way of behaving. And in fact, the opposite is true. This is what we're learning in the psychotherapy world, and what we might think of as sort of like fourth wave therapies, where actually we need to act our way into a new way of thinking. We need to act our way into a new way of feeling. So in some ways, this idea of how do we inhabit our bodies? How do we stand in postures? How do we take care of our bodies healthfully through exercise and diet and things like that, that actually builds the foundation of our body then feeling better. Then we feel safe and secure in our bodies in a different way if we've been through difficult experiences. And that starts to really transform things. We also then want to find ways that we can shift our thinking by doing different things, by deliberately practicing gratitude, by deliberately doing certain therapeutic things, whether it's going to therapy and doing that talk therapy, but also practicing mindfulness, practicing self-compassion, other kinds of mental exercises that I think are so powerful with shifting our thoughts. And we do that through action, and we start to see results, and then our brains wire for looking at the world with new perspectives. And then it becomes a habit over time. And then lastly, acting differently in relationships. And then we develop a different feedback loop with the world. If we fight the world fights back. If we flee from things in the world, we certainly never engage fully with all that the world has to offer, and see the opportunities when they come, and seize them, and have some healing and come out of that. And certainly if we kind of freeze or give up, or blunt ourselves with different kinds of substances and behaviors, then we're also never able to fully engage. But when we change these behaviors with other people, with our relationships, then we get feedback from other people too in very different ways. They treat us differently. We start to see ourselves really differently. If I stand up for myself, people start to treat me with more respect. I start to have more self-respect. If I perform esteemable acts, right, my self-esteem grows because people hold me in esteem for doing healthy and productive and positive things in this world and making a positive impact. And then that becomes self-reinforcing. I'm not having to deliberately do those things, but it becomes a habit. And then my entire perspective starts to shift. So all of these ways of acting our way into a new way of thinking and feeling are part of this process of building more post-traumatic growth, not just falling into post-traumatic stress. And again, both of these things are hopefully always happening at the same time, but there's not a clear timeline for something like this post-traumatic growth.
So, how does self compassion play a role in all of this?
Yeah, I love this question. And I've been a mindfulness practitioner for many years and found it really helpful. And then I started exploring more self-compassion practices, both formally and informally in my own life and with clients and patients who I work with and in workshops that I put on. And suddenly discovering this self-compassion stuff was really like like a accelerant for healing, like throwing more wood into the fire of my own healing process and watching it happen and transform other people as well so quickly. And so self-compassion is really, it's about how do we treat ourselves, right? The way we'd want to be treated, right? Or the way that we'd maybe treat a child, or we'd treat a friend, or we'd treat someone that we love. We so often do not treat ourselves with kindness, with forgiveness, with compassion. We so rarely give ourselves a break, right? We give other people a free pass in our lives, but we say, well, what's the matter with me, right? There must be something wrong with me or broken with me. And when we start to learn to forgive ourselves, and we start to learn how to cultivate a more compassionate inner voice besides that inner critic that we all have, that inner critic that says, you're not a good enough broadcaster, you're not a good enough driver if it's drive time right now for folks, you're not a good enough worker, a good enough parent, a good enough partner, a good enough therapist, right? For me, right, whatever that is, we all have that voice. What if we didn't believe that voice, right? And that to me was transformational. Wait, I don't have to believe that critical voice. And not only that, but maybe I can learn how to cultivate a voice that's maybe a bit more kind, a bit more compassionate inside. And for a long time, I doubted, and many people I work with have a lot of doubts. So, well, that's just going to make me too soft. My standards are going to go down. But in fact, what the research finds is that actually the more kind and compassionate we are to ourselves, which is not letting ourselves off the hook for everything, I should say, right? Actually, the more productive we are, the happier we are, the more we bounce back from quote unquote failures and challenges, and we keep at things and persist in these really different ways. So this idea of self-compassion that can sound so soft, it actually really does make us stronger, make us more resilient as we see, right, that we don't have to speak to ourselves quite so harshly. And that maybe that inner voice that sounds like a parent or a caregiver, or maybe the larger voices of society saying there's something wrong with you because the what you've been through, or the color of your skin, or who you love, or these other things, maybe that voice isn't right, or that abusive partner or someone, or that abusive boss, right? That inner voice that we've then internalized, we don't have to listen to that voice. And there's more compassionate voices inside that we can start to listen to, and they'll steer us right, and they'll still keep us safe the way that more critical voice does, but in a way that doesn't lead to us feeling terrible about ourselves.
Yeah, it seems to be a default for so many of us. Why do you think that is?
I think in this society where we are so competitive, we spend so much time comparing ourselves in this social media world. It's, this person's got more likes and that person does. And all of those things are actually, they play on this kind of human weakness that's evolved into us through evolution, where we do compare ourselves. And we used to need to compare ourselves more for survival, right? Oh, I better run a little faster. I better, hunt or gather a little better than these other people if I want to survive, if I want to pass my genes on, right? That's built into us through evolution. And we don't need that quite so much in our modern world. We still have our worries, right? We still need food and shelter and all those things. But amazingly, we actually are in so many ways safer and more stable than at any point in human history. And I want to say it does not feel like that, Marianne, but that is the truth. We actually are safer, but then we still are comparing ourselves, right? That person's better at this person's better at that. And we start to then internalize that critical voice. that's not so helpful to us. And in many ways, it's gotten us where we need to be. But we're now, a lot of us, it's starting to have those diminishing returns where it just makes us feel worse. You add in depression, you add in maybe not so perfect parents or caregivers, you add in an abusive boss or an unkind spouse or other challenges that we face in our lives or traumas of the pandemic or the traumas people face, right? And that critical voice only gets louder, and that more compassionate voice, unfortunately, only gets harder and harder to hear.
In your book, you talk about embodied movement, and I was real impressed with that. Your discussion with your neuroscientist friend.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think the pandemic, I think, made us all, aware of just so much. But one thing I was thinking about in the pandemic, and this is an example of that, how do we act our way into a new way of feeling? But I would do these workshops where I'd say to, on Zoom, of course, right? Where I'd say to folks, imagine someone who's depressed, right? What do they look like? Right? And people would type back into the chat box, right? Someone never, sleeps all day and goes to bed at weird hours and eats at weird times and, doesn't get out of their pajamas and doesn't leave the house and is isolated. And I said, well, what has everyone been doing for the last couple of weeks or last couple of months, right? And suddenly everyone's like, oh yeah, right. The pandemic is an example of acting our way into a depression, right? Where we're not leaving the house and we're not getting changed and we're not exercising, we're not eating, we're not sleeping, we're not, being with other people and interacting with folks. And we know that all of these things regulate us in a really important, powerful way, right? We're evolved to, as I said, hunt and gather and be in a tribe and be with people and, sleep and, these other things. And realizing that the trauma of the pandemic, really did impact us. And what we had to do really impacted our mental health. And so when we actually bring embodied movement to life, there are certain postures that we can do from yoga, and we start moving and holding our bodies in a confident way that feels like we're taking up the space that we deserve in the world, that actually changes begin to happen in our bodies. Not only do our bodies become physically stronger and we have more confidence in our bodies for maybe, fighting off what they need to fight off, whether it's illness or an attacker or something like that, but they also start to change what's happening hormonally in terms of our confidence, in terms of someone can say something to us, and depending on how we're holding our body, it actually rolls off of us in a different way. Criticism rolls off of us when it's unfair, but we take in actually what it is that we want to change. We take things less personally, oftentimes, when we hold our bodies in more confident ways. And when we breathe in different ways, when we walk in different ways, all of these actually change the way that we perceive the world, change the ways that we perceive ourselves, change our thinking, and actually reset and re-regulate our nervous system so that we're not then feeling like there's danger lurking around every corner and we're trying to fight it, which is unhelpful, or we're fleeing from it, which is unhelpful, or we're just freezing and giving up and saying forget it to life, which is also unhelpful. But we're able to actively engage in our lives in a really different way that creates that healing that then also becomes self-reinforcing with the way that we interact with the world.
How much of your book is based, like science-based?
Yeah, I had so much fun doing a lot of the research, checking out what's happening in the psychotherapy research that's happening in the neuroscience research that's cutting edge in terms of trauma, in terms of mindfulness and self-compassion, as well as looking at positive psychology and also looking at not just all these cutting edge studies about all of this and about even physically what's happening at the genetic level and the hormonal level, but also looking too at what have societies had to teach us in terms of spirituality? What does that do in terms of our healing? Or looking historically at what has created more resilience in healing over time, thinking about the cultural rituals that different cultures do, that different spiritual traditions do, and what's the research and science behind why those work to help us heal, to help us to be the people that we want to be, despite maybe what's happened to us. And so that was a really fun part of the book, was seeing, oh my gosh, so much of this, as one of my own clients said, oh, Dr. Willard, I always liked this self-compassion and mindfulness stuff, but now I know it's real. And it's like, yeah, it's real. There's real exciting research and coming out of places like Oxford, coming out of places like Harvard Medical School where I work, out of Stanford, out of leading institutions. And that to me is so exciting, seeing that this is based in real science.
So, is getting to this place of being relaxed, is that something that we really need to focus on so we can get to this place of calm?
Well, I think learning how to turn on and off, right, that fight or flight response, that freeze and F it response, that's not a bad thing. That's really good. That kept us safe if we've been through a trauma. It keeps us safe if a bus cuts in front of us when we're about to cross the street. We need a fight or flight response, right? We need that to happen. But what happens is when our brains rewire themselves in the trauma response so that we're in that all the time, or we have a hair trigger for those responses, that's when it becomes a problem. So what we want to do is not be walking around perfectly relaxed and carefree all the time, because that bus will hit us. We will be victimized in certain places. We will be taken advantage of. And so what we want to do is learn, when is it safe for me to have that fight or flight response on, which is maybe driving in LA traffic, but then we get to the office, how do we make sure that we turn it off? Right? We want to have that freeze or that hide response, that play dead response, if we've been through a war, like a veteran perhaps, but that's not going to be helpful back home with the family, with the kids, right? We need to be seen, we need to be engaged, we need to be active and not look like we're playing dead in some ways in our bodies, in our nervous systems. So it's learning how to turn it on and learning how to turn it off. That to me is recovery, right? Not being perfectly relaxed at every moment, but that then we approach different situations and we can be calm at work. We can be calm with the kids, with the people that we love, and not fly off the handle into a rage, or not shut down at the first sign of conflict, or not cut and run the first time that new person we're dating doesn't show a red flag, but maybe shows, like a little bit of a disagreement. We don't think, oh, I'm out of here, I'm out of this relationship again, because in fact, maybe they are safe despite there being some disagreements or some conflicts every so often.
Is there a practice you can share with us that we can use now to kind of get into this place of calm?
Absolutely. I know I had actually a client tell me recently, breathing is played out, but I do feel like when we regulate our breath, what we know, and we know we can regulate our breath. When we regulate our breath, we regulate our bodies, and then in turn, we're regulating our nervous system and our brain. And so we begin to be able to then regulate our emotions and our impulses and actually the quality of our attention. So some of these physical actions of even just standing upright, standing with confidence, and slowing our breath down a little bit. I sometimes say actually there's like a reset button in the bottom of your lungs. You have to breathe deeply to hit that reset button. If things aren't working, when your internet's not working and your computer's not working, you call tech support, the first thing they do is say, restart your computer. You got to reset your nervous system, your operating system too. Hit that reset button in the bottom of your lungs with a longer breath. And we actually have different nerve endings in the bottom of our lungs than the top of our lungs. So you breathe short and shallow, you go into panic, you breathe deep and slow. It tells your body to reset, your brain to focus, your emotions to settle down, your social system to turn on the trust response. So slowing our breath down to 5 or 6 breaths in a minute, which actually, speaking of the science of spirituality, that's about the same that we get if we, chant certain indigenous chants, or say the Hail Mary, or chant Om Padme Padme Om, that these different chants and songs actually get us into the same breath rate and rhythm. And this hits that reset button. So things like this, just slowing and regulating our breath down, taking time to notice what's working. The more stressed we are, the more we've been through, the more our brains will start to look for the negative and look for danger. And so it might sound a little Pollyanna-ish to say, well, look for the positive. And I don't mean look for the positive instead of noticing the negative, right? We're going to look for and notice the negative. Our brains are going to do that, actually, whether we've been through traumatic experiences or not. But we do have to deliberately take time to look at the positive, right? To remember those little glimmers, as a friend of mine calls them, those little moments of trust, of safety, of positivity, of happiness, of joy in our day, almost like a gratitude practice, right? Of, oh, the sun is shining, or, oh, I did get a nice text message from a friend of mine. We have to take the time to allow those to sink in, because otherwise we assume everything is terrible. I don't have any friends. I am so isolated. We have to take time to actually look for and savor. And then what happens is we encode some of those positive experiences, and they remind us where safety is throughout our day. And our nervous system doesn't go haywire constantly, but remembers, oh, I've got these touch points in the day. I've got that nice person I buy my coffee from. And then I pass that beautiful tree on the way to work. And then when we take those in on the way to the office, we feel a little better by the time we get to the office, and we park our car and we take a breath or two before we get out of our car and head into the elevator to deal with the maybe toxic work environment after the toxic traffic environment. And we find these moments and ways that we reset ourselves throughout the day, and our nervous system starts to shift and our life starts to shift. So even some of these little things that we do can start to add up over time.
Well, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, so don't we love that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Christopher, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Thank you so much for asking. At Dr. Chris Willard, Dr. Chris Willard, on Instagram and other social media. That's where I am there. My website, drchristopherwillard.com, to get more information about my books, my classes, things like that online. And you can find the book in bookstores, real life bookstores, brick and mortar, as well as all those big ones we know of online. But it's How We Grow Through What We Go Through from Sounds True. And there's an audiobook too that just was released as well. So I'm so excited to share some of what I've learned with folks in the audience, some of what my clients and folks in my workshops have discovered about how they can grow through the challenges that they've been through and come out of traumatic experiences with growth, and not just with those feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness, and feeling out of control.
Well, Dr. Willard, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Willard. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, How We Grow Through What We Go Through: Self-Compassion Practices for Post-Traumatic Growth. How We Go Through What We Grow Through is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And, of course, support our indie bookstores. You can also purchase this book at the publisher Sounds True at SoundsTrue.com. Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick moment, and we'll be right back after this message. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.